So I'm very excited about today's panel, where we're going to be exploring the Lathrop Homes development, named after a champion for equity, Julia, and a Rockford native, Julia Lathrop. I really feel like the theme of our Bridging the Gap is being set up so nicely. Last month we were at the grassroots level with community-led development, and now we're definitely the tree canopy with a CHA development of 32 acres on the north side of the city. Our moderator this afternoon is Andrew Greer, who is the Vice President at Enterprise Community Partners. Enterprise Community Partners' mission is to create opportunity for low and moderate income people through affordable housing in diverse and thriving neighbourhoods. Under his leadership, Enterprise and its affiliates have invested $360 million to create over 2,300 affordable and high-quality homes. He's also uniquely qualified to lead this panel, since previous to Enterprise, he was at Heartland Alliance for 14 years, where he led the RFP response and through to selection. So I'll allow him to introduce the rest of the panel and get us started. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Lindsay. Again, I'm not sure if this is like a penance that I'm paying for leading the team through the selection process, or actually a reward. But very honored here today to be really part of leading this panel. This is really, Lathrop Homes is itself such a unique opportunity relative to public housing and mixed income redevelopments. And I think what we're going to try to hear from today is, again, sort of the team that's on the ground that's really trying to make this happen, about the uniqueness of the property, about the opportunities, the challenges. Many times when we actually think about doing these developments, or we talk about in a real estate terms, we talk about velocity and getting speed of execution and trying to move into the market. This is not necessarily that story. This is a story about perseverance and an ability to actually work together with community stakeholders, with a development team, with architects and planners, with everybody, to really have a very high impact on this community of Lathrop Homes. So I'm not going to do very long introductions. Everybody said that they didn't need me to read their bios, but I'll do very quick introductions of the panelists that we have here today. First is Jacques Sandberg, who is the Vice President at Related Midwest. Related Midwest is, I would say, again, one of the part of the Related company, so a nationally known development company, and one of the largest owner-operators of affordable housing in the city, as well as within the region. So under Jacques' leadership, he's really focused in on these plan for transformation projects, as well as acquisition of affordable properties in Illinois and within Chicago. Michael Goldberg is the Executive Director of Heartland Housing. Again, Michael was part of our development team. He was our Senior Director. He's been on with Heartland for over 10 years now? 12? 14. 14. Wow. Yeah, that's a velocity question, I guess. And under Michael's leadership, again, the organization continues to grow, both in its impact within low-income communities and the populations it's serving, does a lot of supportive housing, does a lot of work around the plan for transformation, and then also geographic expansion into other markets, including Wisconsin. And then third on our panel is Joy Aruguete. And Joy is the Chief Executive Officer of Bickerdike Redevelopment, and Joy has been there for a long time, but really has represents a community of voice in the West Town and in that the Logan Square and then those communities, Humboldt Park communities, around, again, development without displacement. So they were an important aspect to have to this team when we were starting to pull together our team of developers to move this forward. So Joy was a great voice and brought a new perspective and a community perspective to that process. And then finally we have Anthony Alvarez, who is with us as the development manager for the Lathrop Homes project. And Anthony has been at the CHA for about 18 years, and has been involved in mixed income developments, both at Lathrop Homes, but also in Altgeld Gardens, Legend South, and the tennis and recreational facility that has been created. So I think, again, Lathrop is such a unique opportunity, and I think what we wanted to do was also provide a little bit of context. So I'm going to turn it over to Jacques Sandberg to run through a little bit of a PowerPoint deck about the development site, the parcel, and some of the goals of the development team. Okay.
Thank you, Andy, and thanks everybody else for coming this morning. So Lathrop, there it is. Lathrop is an unusual, actually unique, and I try not to use that word, redevelopment in Chicago, in that it is a historic public housing site that we are largely preserving and turning into a mixed income development as part of the CHA's plan for transformation, or now Plan Forward. It was established in 1938. I'm just going to run through some of this very quickly just to give you a sense of the history and what we're doing with it. But we've embraced the name because of the history of the property and because of the history of Julia C. Lathrop. She was, as Courtney pointed out, or as Lindsay pointed out, an important social reformer whose legacy we want to remember. It was established in 1938. For those of you who aren't familiar, it's sort of wedged between, it's really a neighborhood unto itself, but north of Bucktown and Wicker Park, east of Logan Square, west of Lakeview, and just south of Roscoe Village. So anybody who's on the north side knows the property from having driven by it on Clybourne or Damon, but few, I think, have gotten into the site. At the turn of the last century, it looked like this. This was the International Harvester McCormick Reaper Plant Deering Works. It was an industrial area surrounded by industrial uses and workers' housing. In 37 or so, the PWA, the predecessor to the Works Progress Administration, did a national demonstration. 50 sites were built across the country, 3 of them in Chicago. This was an attempt to get construction workers working, architects who were sitting on their hands employed, and also to get housing, workforce housing for people. This was the first time that the federal government ever got involved in the direct provision of affordable housing. It had been entirely in private hands prior to that. The site now looks like this from the air. You'll see that where there were once industrial uses is now one of the highest performing Costco's on the planet, I think. Some big box stuff across the river, and expensive housing, 7-figure housing surrounding it. So it's a very different site than it was in 1938. And a great place, we think, to establish a solid mixed income community. The site in 2012 was designated a National Register District, so the entire site, which runs, this is, I'm kind of looking from the side, this is Clybourne, this is Damon, and half a mile of river. That entire site is on the National Register. It's a National Register District. That severely constrains what we're able to do with the buildings, but it also enables us to take advantage of historic tax credits. This is not to be taken too seriously, but it's a representation of the ultimate development plan insofar as the brown buildings that you see at the top will be historically preserved and brought up to modern standards using the Secretary of the Interior standards for historic preservation. The buildings at the bottom are not buildings, these are massing studies, but you can see that the orange ones denote new construction or potentially new construction. So this overall scheme we got approved at the Park Service, National Park Service, which is the ultimate arbiter of whether or not we get historic credits. It was a long process, but this is the final plan. One thing to note is that we're going to be bringing in a new street here at Schubert that'll align with the Costco parking lot. Unfortunately, it never really had urban fabric in a residential sense around it. It continues to the east not to have it, but it was important to the community surrounding it, and we thought for the site itself to connect a little bit more closely to the neighbors. The new construction, I should point out that there will be some new construction buildings. So first, the first phase will be the entire north half of the site. Anybody who's been out there lately will see that we're under construction. As part of that, we're going to be building this building south. It will be new construction. The second phase will be coming up with, which will include this new building and these rehabs. So because we're working with the Park Service, and they were very, I would say, almost rigid about what we could do with the new construction, the new buildings will look very similar. They'll be very historicist. They'll look very similar to the older buildings, but these are going to have elevators and be fully accessible. On the north half of the site, which is our first phase, there are some important aspects that we are preserving apart from the buildings. This is the landscape architect at the time, and there were, as I said, a series of architects involved with this, and many of them notable. The landscape architect was Jens Jensen, sort of in the pantheon of landscape architects in the city of Chicago. He did this landscape towards the end of his career. Nevertheless, we are preserving the great lawn at the center. We're also reestablishing, or really establishing, I would say, for the first time, a connection to the river. You saw the image at the turn of the century. It was, even when it was built, it was still very much industrial. The river was fetid. Nobody was going down there. And so the site turned its back to the river. Now we're going to be opening that up. We're going to be doing habitat restoration, a boat launch, be putting in a boat house up here. And here are some renderings that sort of just represent that. This is a section of the bank that's going to get habitat restoration. A river walk that will be running the entire length of the site, as I say, about half a mile. This is in the first phase. There's a boat launch that we'll be putting in. This is at the south end of the site. This is a little bit less set in stone, but there'll be an establishment of a sort of a promenade at some point on the south. And finally, we're going to be rehabbing the buildings on the north. So this will be, if you're out there now, you'll see the extensive brick replacement that we have to go through. But we're also going to be bringing in historically accurate divided light windows. Some of those are going in now. They're casement windows, really elegant. We did another major historic renovation using these windows, and it transforms the building. So from the outside, we are constrained, but they're going to be completely new looking. They'll look like they did in 1938. And on the insides, they will be completely new. They're stripped down to the outside walls. They're going to be highly energy efficient, modern appliances, modern finishes. Every unit type, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3, every income category will look indistinguishable from every other. All those units will be intermixed. And you see the effect of having these old buildings with narrow floor plates and these terrific, cute, really large windows will, we think, give these units a spectacular appeal. That's it in a nutshell. Sorry, very quick, but we can answer questions.
Thanks, Jacques. So obviously, when you look at it again, the elegance of it, with the audience. So I'm going to start with Anthony a little bit. As the CHA representative, I always start with the people who actually control the land. If you control the real estate, then you get the first question. So talk to me a little bit about the uniqueness of Lathrop, that it was as you thought about it within the CHA. And traditionally, the public housing redevelopments were done in sort of a concept of 1/3 a mix of public housing units, 1/3 mix of market rate units, and 1/3 mix of affordable. So you guys sort of threw that playbook out the window when you were looking at Lathrop. So talk a little bit about what were you trying to achieve? What was the CHA trying to achieve as you looked at the Lathrop opportunity?
So talking from a CHA perspective, and I've been at CHA since 1999, Plan for Transformation, and our goal ultimately for the Plan for Transformation was to take these isolated pockets of poverty and reintroduce them into the broader community. Very basic, simple. At its core, that's what we were trying to do. Because these areas are self-sufficient, you really didn't need to go outside. We wanted to reintroduce everyone back into the broader community. Lathrop is a little different because when we were doing that, the Plan for Transformation, we were the catalyst for the redevelopment of those general areas. Whereas Lathrop was unique because it sat on the north side next to a very robust community. So instead of us going out and reintroducing ourselves to the broader community and development, that was already existing. There was a community there. We needed to see how we could bring the community into Lathrop. That was the difference. And obviously, how do you do that with amenities? What do we have to work with? We had to work with the Chicago River, the Great Lawn. We had to work with historic nature, trying to maintain the historic integrity of that site, and the people, the residents. There's a strong sense of community, self-identity. And I think that's one of the reasons why the development team chose to keep Lathrop instead of changing it. So that's kind of the difference, and I think, I don't want to go too much into detail, but I think that was the difference at the core.
So we've alluded a little bit to the overall issue of the community building aspects of this, and again, even though there was an existing community there with the Lathrop Homes residents, and now as you're looking at creating a new mixed income community, the importance of really starting to build some of those bridges between the market, the community, as well as just the existing residents was of critical importance to moving forward with this plan. So Joy, I'll ask you a little bit about how the development team sort of looked at their community building approach relative to Lathrop. I think a lot of people are probably aware again of the challenges in trying to move this development forward. There was a lot of belief, again, from the perspective of the community that because of the gentrification and because of the high market rate components around them, they wanted to preserve as many units as public housing as possible. So it was really important to have a very robust community building approach as embedded into this team. So Joy, let me talk a little bit about the approach that the development team took towards that.
Good afternoon. I think because, as Andy said, there were a lot of opinions about what should happen at Lathrop. And it was hard to find anybody in almost any crowd, including probably some people in this room, that didn't have a strong opinion about what happened at Lathrop Homes. And so we knew that it was going to be important to engage and really get everybody's opinions out. Everybody thought that their opinion should be heard. We knew that our final plan needed to be to reflect all of those opinions and what we knew to be best practices in the design of the project. And so, in fact, the Lathrop residents who were there, and there were about 140 families that remain at the site today out of the 925 original units. And they thought that their opinion should be the opinion, and they didn't really want to interact with people in the surrounding neighborhoods. And I still remember the early planning meetings where we brought community residents to the table, Lathrop residents to the table, and many stakeholders in the neighborhoods and the surrounding neighborhoods into the planning process. And sitting down in a small group, people said, you know, this is the first time I've ever met anyone from Lathrop or talked to them. And by the same token, it was the first time that Lathrop residents had really had a conversation with the people who were their neighbors right across the street. And so we knew that we weren't going to make everybody happy, but we knew that we wanted to make sure that everybody saw a little bit of their ideas in the final plan. And so what we set out to do initially was that related and two previous members of the team who rolled off, and would do the market rate, and Bickerdike and Heartland would do the affordable and the public. And it didn't take long to realize that that was a terrible idea. And so we knew that our plan really had to reflect to have a successful mixed income model, that every building would have affordable, public, and market rate housing, and not just every building, but every floor of every building. and that in the design process that we couldn't create sort of the haves and the have-nots, or the haves and the have-mores. And so we also designed the project so that the units were largely, or will be largely indistinguishable from one another. And as a way to make everybody welcome in the site. And I think,
That's good, yeah.
I'll wrap there.
I think that's a good starting point for that. Maybe I'll throw this over to Michael too, as you sort of think through the development too, and how do you create a successful mixed income development that really builds off the historic and the physical assets of Lathrop, but is also reflective of a diverse community, income, racially, and in every aspect of that.
Sure. So I think you've heard some of those ways in what my colleagues have stated in terms of how to build that mixed income community. And some of the things that we did, I think it's always important to start with the context. And we were blessed with some amazing context. This is a market that everyone wanted to be in, that everyone will want to be in. And so Andy mentioned sort of these three sort of demographic profiles of the residents that we serve in any mixed income or through the CHA. And so there's a market rate component or unrestricted. There's what we would consider affordable, and then former public housing residents. And for this site, just given that it's a waterfront development, that it's in an existing strong neighborhood with many amenities that anyone would want to be near. Transportation, schools, parks, all of those things, shopping, those things that any of us would want. So we're starting with this great base, and Jacques mentioned the buildings themselves. And while they were built as public housing in the 30s, and they're very simple in their design, they're also, they have some amazing attributes to them. And once you peel off some of the layers of history to them, or the layers of wear, fix them up, they really lay out quite beautifully. Those renderings show that you can have windows on all sides of a room that you're in. And the scale of them, back at that time, the scale of the design and with the landscaping and the scale of the buildings, it just started to make a lot of sense that we would keep those buildings and really reuse them, and that those would be marketable. And that's, I think we're starting from that. And then on the site itself, again, a lot of unique opportunities to make this a neighborhood. And ultimately, that's the goal. We want to, there's a lot of community already there, but we want to go beyond that and really make this a vital neighborhood, vital community for the people living on this site, but also those, stitch it together with the neighborhoods that adjoin us. And so how do we do that? There will be some public spaces or gathering spaces on the site where neighbors, no matter what your income, you'll want to avail yourself of those services. And so there's a Boys and Girls Club on the site that was important not only to the people that live there now, but to the surrounding neighborhood. There's a school nearby that wants to use that facility. And so how can we think of that as part of the community building that'll happen on the site? Future phases, we're rehabbing an existing park and making that sort of a gem feature of the site. The great lawn that we're revitalizing, and again, not just for the residents, that'll live here, but the neighbors in the community, so that it's not this isolated island again. That's where the public housing residents live, but that this is just a neighborhood that you want to walk your dog in, bike to. And that there's amenities there that you can start mingling with your neighbors and breaking down those silos that sometimes are evident either in older public housing or lower income neighborhoods. It's really just trying to create that mix that I think is representative of any healthy neighborhood. And then we're going even to some further lengths. So I stopped short of calling it social engineering, but things that we can do to help improve the chances that our residents are going to mingle together and have services that they need. So staff that'll be engaging residents, full-time staff that'll engage residents around activities. I'll talk about this a little later, but our thoughts around the riverfront and how we plan for the ongoing maintenance and management and programming of that riverfront. So there's a lot of things that we're doing to try and take advantage of the historic nature and the physical assets of bringing people together.
Great. I think that's important to understand, again, sort of the investment in human capital as much as there is an investment in the physical capital at this project. Anthony, we talked a little bit about this too. You know, there were a lot of tension relative to sort of the working with existing residents and many community-based organizations or community groups that wanted to preserve 100% of the units. How did the CHA sort of address that balance and balance that need to one, you know, again, still try to stay true to creating a mixed income community, but also meeting an obligation again around advancing affordability in a marketplace where affordability is hard to find?
Per se, CHA didn't have to do one-for-one. So for example, if we were reducing or deconcentrating a certain public housing development, we didn't have to bring back the same amount. Again, Lathrop's a little different, a little unique, whereas different previous administrations had committed to bringing back, originally there was 925 units, we were going to construct 400 public housing units. Total would be 1,116 total units. 400 of those would be public housing, so there's a gap or a difference of 525 units. Previous administrations had agreed verbally that we were going to bring back 525 units on the north side. That had been verbally said. Our new, well, not new anymore, a couple years now, this administration with under CEO Jones, Eugene Jones, actually went out and put that on a letter and told everybody, yes, we confirm we're going to do that. And that letter actually helped us in our planning process. We were able to use that to make sure that the residents, the advocates, felt a little more comfortable with what we were doing. We were going before the planning department, and we were doing the TIF and things of that nature. Now it went actually a further step that now it's memorialized in an agreed order. So we're going to be bringing back the 525, but it's clear, and especially in the CEO's letter, we can't do it by ourselves. We needed assistance from the development community and also from the local elected officials, because it's a little hard to find 525 infill lots on the north side of the city of Chicago to do this. So there is a commitment to do that. And on top of that, real quickly, there's also a commitment to bring back 104 senior elderly units. So we're actually bringing back more than the 525. We're bringing back approximately 627, 628 units total. So.
Great, thanks, Anthony. And then, you know, I'll ask Jacques this, or maybe Will, you can opine on this too a little bit, but around the use of the historic tax credits, and again, sort of how the development team, again, was trying to be true to that, and again, you've come to sort of the recognition that it just makes sense, but it provided challenges in putting together the development process. People may not be aware at this time you were working on this, we were closing, and there was discussions about tax reform and potential implications of that, but on these development teams, and so there was some unsteadiness in some of these markets around this. But talk a little bit about the use of historic tax credits and how you manage that as a development team.
Right, so I don't know that I would actually say that we concluded that it made sense to use historic tax credits. Yeah. Constitutionally, I'm a preservationist. I mean, I prefer, you know, we've lost far too many important buildings in this particular city, and our legacy here is one that we should embrace. And you know, it's the greenest thing to do, and there are a whole host of reasons why it makes sense to preserve buildings. I would say that, you know, this has been, we were, I think, selected 7, 8, I don't know, many years ago. And the historic, close to 8. The historic credits were not the reason it took so long, although the process around those is certainly sort of the community process, deciding whether to retain the buildings, which, and as I said, this is sort of the first time in the CHA's portfolio that any of these sites has been preserved and then turned into a mixed income development. We sort of through that process concluded that it did make sense to preserve many of the buildings, but the challenges are manifest. So, you know, those buildings on the north side are not accessible. In 1937, 38, there was no ADA, so how do you make them accessible? They're single-loaded buildings, so you can't insert an elevator, there's no back way out. So we had to produce some new buildings in order to provide ADA accessible units. Well, that was a challenge for the Park Service to get their heads around, and their general position was that it didn't really matter whether the credits were critical to, or the linchpin in preserving the buildings. If you can't meet the guidelines, they're not super inclined to work with you. I think the Park Service would beg to differ, and they actually ultimately did work a lot with us. It just took a very, very long time. And I should also say that what Andy was alluding to with the tax credit markets, you know, this project took so long that in the last year and a half, as Trump got elected and then tax reform was in the works, that has profound impacts to things like this that rely on tax incentives. And so when you don't know what's happening, overnight when Trump was elected, the price of the credits plummeted because people were speculating that there wouldn't be the interest for the credits, that the corporate tax rate would go down. So.
And then one last question, I'll just open it up for anybody to sort of respond to is, again, how do you think of this model or the work, the uniqueness of Lathrop, again, sort of thinking about it as an economically and environmentally sustainable development? How do you think this is replicable, or is it not, or what are the lessons learned and about trying to do this going forward?
I'll wade into that. So, you know, people are always inclined to say this will be a national model for development. I don't know that this is going to be replicable anywhere. I mean, I would say that to the extent that there are other, and there were again 50 of these done in the mid to late 30s. To the extent that there are any of these extant, I think it could be a model. I mean, I think that these buildings are they are worth preserving. So despite my, you know, grousing about the historic process, these buildings are really worth preserving, and there are very few left. And I think just understanding where we've come as a country over the years and how we've provided for people and what was involved, and I think that, you know, people should look at the Lathrop redevelopment if they're faced with another such site in some other city and tempted to tear it down and build some kind of stick-built suburban-looking sprawl. These were really elegantly done. These were the best, you know, architects around. Robert DeGolyer, who designed a lot of the stuff on Lakeshore Drive in the 20s. Handsome buildings for the affluent was the lead architect on this. They're simple, elegant buildings that really deserve to be preserved, and hopefully that is a precedent for other people.
Michael or Joy, talk a little bit about sort of the sustainability of the human capital aspect of this development too, and how do you sustain, because you guys are investors in this for a long time.
Yeah. Well, and so there's a body of research now, a body of evidence about how these mixed income developments are performing. And one of the areas that you'll note that there's not as much success is around this idea of human capital. So we can rebuild neighborhoods, we can build buildings new or rehab them, put physical spaces in place, but it's hard to organically say, okay, now mixed income community, all play together and go to school and everyone's going to be happy. So there has to be a real commitment to helping that along. The evidence also has suggested that no one views that as their work, that there's no one that says, okay, that's going to be my job or my organization's role to help community build in a place, to help make those relationships, foster those kinds of connections. And you know, I think as a development team, we've committed to that, but it's going to be more than us doing that work. But I think if we can garner those resources, get that interest in doing it, it's something that could lead to sustainability and ultimately success of this development measured in a different way. The other thing I was going to suggest is, so what was unique about Lathrop as
30
well
seconds,
is,
Michael.
Oh,
30 seconds.
30 seconds, sorry, yeah. So we didn't come into this with a plan. In other developments, the developer's allowed to just forward a plan and that's built. This really took a lot of community input. and I'll be kicked afterward. But there is something to that process of just asking people what they want on a site or in a development or where they're living, and I think that's an important piece that is a part of any successful development. I'll stop there.
And I just want to add, I think, so can it be replicated? The first thing that we have to do is make it successful, because we're not there yet. We think that we have a design that can be successful. I think that first and foremost, there has to be a thoughtful process that thinks more about how you build a successful mixed income development and not just buildings. And because we all know how to do pro formas and get our buildings to be financially successful, but getting the right mix so that you have, a low turnover rate and you have people that aren't arguing with one another, especially in the plan for transformation projects. And, we think that we have designed it not just in the physical design of the buildings, but in bringing people together. As Michael said, there'll be a community engagement specialist that works full-time at the site, that as we welcome people into the buildings, we'll be bringing everyone together so that they get to know one another before they associate one another with the type of building that they live in, or the type of unit that they live in. And I think, first and foremost, I think it requires a lot of thought, and it has to be designed that way. And I think, like I said, it's not just buildings, it's really building a successful model of interaction and thinking about the people who will live there.
Right. I think that's important. Again, we don't necessarily have all the answers in this sort of space of doing mixed income developments, and I think, again, congrats to the team for really, persevering on this. So now I'm going to open it up for questions. So I don't know if they have a mic or. Go ahead.
I see my hand and Les went up at the same time. I'm Ernie Sawyer. Les and I worked on this issue for years ago, way back. One of the things that I like to say, you talk about mixed income housing. I think what we need to address is mixed income communities in a comprehensive fashion. I think, Anthony, we have, many years ago, Les and I looked at Bronzeville in terms of CHA, Robert Taylor, Stateway Gardens, and all of that. Are you finding now that schools, the Board of Education, CHA, and other agencies are breaking down the silos to really where you guys can get together and come up with a comprehensive plan to develop mixed income communities beyond just your job to build housing? Education said they build schools, but certainly we have recognized that these all need to come together and break these silos down, and the city needs a comprehensive plan.
Yeah.
You want me to answer that for you guys? It might be a little political.
We all might have to take the
Or,
All I can say is that CHA has taken a much more holistic approach to our redevelopment efforts. For example, what we did down on 51st Estate with the excess tennis recreational facility. That was former Robert Taylor land that had been vacant for years, and we had no identified funding for it. So we utilized that land, and now we have a major destination point on the south side. We also are working in Mariano's up on 47th, is it? 39th over there. 47th Street is what we did work down with the Walmart shops and lofts. So there is a effort at CHA to take more of an initiative, much more holistic, and we're always entertaining opportunities.
I just wanted to quickly add to Anthony. I think I can't say that there was a master strategy to bring everyone to the table, but we did meet with everyone, and we took the initiative, and we asked the CHA to play a facilitating role now and again, and they did in terms of setting meetings up. But we met with the schools in the area. We did a lot of local sort of boots on the ground work that we had tried to accomplish sort of from the top down, but ended up finding a more successful strategy to work from the, sort of at the ground level and meeting with the exact partners that you're talking about that I think are part of making the development successful.
Yeah, I think, needless to say, there's a lot of improvement that can occur there, again, and it's bringing the right partners to the table. But the development teams are not usually equipped to be dealing with those issues of schools and everything. So we have to do better at that. Les?
First, kudos to you guys for pulling this off. You've indicated, and we all know it's a real torturous path to make this happen. I have a question and a comment. The question, Anthony, I want to clarify is you early said that you're not using the one-third approach here in terms of affordable public and market. What is the mix that you're moving forward with? And secondly, I'm a little confused about the numbers in the end state. How many units on the site? One comment about the notion of the model, as we've been doing a lot of choice neighborhood work across the country, and we've run into a number of cases where we've confronted the historic preservation issue. And what you've done here is you were able to deal with that, but also get acknowledgement that there needs to be new development as well in the site. That's the basis where there could be a model. That story is really important to tell in other communities where the people are either all on or all off regarding preservation. So thank you for that. And if you can make that story clearer, that would be very useful to those of us who are dealing with it.
Great, thanks. So somebody want to clarify sort of the unit count in the mix? And
Yeah. So thanks. I don't know that the Park Service would necessarily want us touting this as a precedent for anything. So, so the ultimate build out is going to be 1,116 units. Of those, the CHA committed years ago to bring back 400 of the 925 public housing units. So that established the floor and, practically speaking, the ceiling. That was the number of public housing units that were coming back. And we went through an extensive process as part of the community process and the debate about what makes a successful mixed income community. There's no formula, and a third, and a third was sort of shorthand that I don't know that any project has ever hewed to precisely. But it was always sort of a guideline for these mixed income developments. Ultimately, what we landed on was that there would be, out of that 1,116, 400 of public housing units, 212 tax credit units, affordable units, so sort of the workforce housing units, and 504, the balance would be unrestricted or market rate. I prefer to call them unrestricted because we're trying to keep the rents below market, what you'd see in a strictly speaking market rate building. And we'll see how that ratio works out. We, for a long time, tried to hold out to have a higher ratio, in fact, of unrestricted units. Not to line our pockets and all of that, but really just as a way to try to ensure that there would be a critical mass of people who affirmatively chose to live there at the site. And we're happy with the mix where it landed.
other questions? And then I'll go way in the back. Go ahead, Christine.
Sure. I have carry on the mix issues. Can you talk a little bit about the types of units that you have there in terms of family units versus singles, what's happening with the demographics today with CHA, and then the waiting to return list? Is that, are you seeing, of those that left the site, is there a large waiting list for that, or are you going to be looking at a larger pool? So how those demographics are going to be played out?
So I'll just repeat the question while you guys are thinking about it, but sort of the question about just the unit mix, and as well as sort of people with the right to return to the site and what's happening with that.
It's not that simple. Lathrop is unique because even though it's a family development, it's a majority of 1 and 2 bedroom units. So that's substantially different than what we had when we had 3 and 4 unit mixes in our other developments. So, and it's different again because we have an existing population that's on site. If you remember when we, for example, at Robert Taylor, all those high-rises, when I started, there were still 22 high-rises up. All those high-rises, gallery style, were demolished. Residents had the opportunity to move outside, temporary or permanent. This is a little different so that we have an existing population that is going to be relocated immediately with the first phase. Secondly, there is a right of return contract that affords the residents that chose to return to Lathrop that are living off-site to return as well. Then you throw in the dynamic, and we don't really have a lot of time. This is a RAD, a PV. It just gets very complicated. There's a RAD, and there's certain regulations that allow for residents who are there during the transition to immediately be housed. It gets very complicated, but every effort is being made to satisfy those residents that are living on site and who are off-site, who have a right to return, to be the first to come back and enjoy this new development.
So, sorry, can you indulge me? I need to rewind. I was completely remiss in my opening remarks. I need to thank Will Tippins, Angela Brooks, and Roberta Neshin for helping to pull this very interesting panel off. So thank you. I apologize for not doing it sooner. Could we, I know we're not really talking about the design so much, but when you were talking about engaging with the community, what is the attitude towards how permeable the street, especially Damon, becomes? Because you have that grade change with the bridge. How are you not having people hopping over that fence and running for their lives across Damon?
I'm sorry, but I reject that characterization. Although there were several times in this when we were tempted to run through the hills. So it was interesting. So the people like in Hamlin Park, which is the neighborhood immediately to the north, among the loudest complaints we heard was that the site was, they felt the site was impermeable. You couldn't, if you're on Clybourne, you cannot see to the river. You don't even know that the Chicago River is a block away. So we heard loud and clear from a lot of quarters that making the site more permeable. I mean, in fact, people were looking to just level the site altogether as a way to get access to the river. But short of that, people wanted more permeability. So we looked at ways of doing that on the north side. Because we're preserving the north side and getting credits for it, the Park Service rejected any attempt to open that up. And in fact, the north is really the most preserved, it's the most historically intact portion of the site, where the original design intent was most fully realized. So the place to do any kind of intervention like that was on the south. And we're doing it at a point on Damon where there is no grade change. It's flat across the street to Costco. We're taking that wall down to the extent that we can. When it gets to the bridge, we're not able to remove the wall. But other than that, it's coming down. I mean, we really want the site to be integrated into the surrounding neighborhood, and that was something that we heard from a lot of different voices.
Doesn't the lakefront or the riverfront path also get broken up at that point too?
So it's been a topic of a lot of discussion lately about the extent to which the riverfront path, is continuous or not. So we're going to be inserting a big important half mile here. You can walk, and I welcome encourage anybody to walk on the south side, which is not under construction right now, with Anthony's permission. You can walk down Levitt and then under the Damon Avenue Bridge, and you can get to Costco. But that's it. It stops there. And so over time, the city has plans and is doing work north of the site, and we expect that there will be work to connect the riverfront path south. Ultimately, it's going to be a continuous chain of river access.
Can I say one real quickly? So under best practices, so CHA is a housing authority, so we're used to being a limelight. There's always a lot of articles about CHA dealing with housing advocates, and that's great. We're very supportive of that, and we're close. But then you throw in the historic preservation, and then you have historic preservation advocacies. So there's a very strong coalition. There's a lot of eyes on this project. The way you meet that, for lack of better terminology, challenge is transparency and communication. And this development team has really gone above and beyond being transparent and communicating and holding meetings after meetings and explaining the process. And that, if anything you take away from today, that's how you, Lathrop, how you can do another Lathrop deal is through that way. Transparency, communication, that's the bottom line.
Linda, I think we got time for one, or I was told I had to end up at 1:20 here. But go ahead.
I'll bet I'm not the only one in the room who would love a tour of the property when the time is right. And again, I don't know what your timing is and how it relates to any future upcoming Elite Chapter Lambda Alpha tours, but I would just say to the board that when the site is ready for tours, I think it would be really fascinating. And thank you for your wonderful
I was just going to ask what version of the pro forma are you in? 147? So please help me thank our panel. We have speaker gifts for you. Thank you everyone for your attention today, and we'll see you next month.